So this actually happened. I was sexually harassed in the 9th grade, and I was in a full class with students and a teacher present. This happened with 2 boys, both on separate occasions with each of the boys. And then a few days later, another incident took place within the same situation, whereby there was a teacher present and there was a classroom full of children. And the same day when the second incident happened, I went back home and I told my mother everything. And mind you, she was livid. She immediately called my father the same night, and my father was equally as livid, if not more. My mother actually asked my father to go to the school and talk to the principal, and that was actually arranged. I gave, you can say, an informal statement, but it was not written down, it was not documented at all. And the deputy principal called in the 2 offenders, and all they did was ask them to apologize. They simply said, apologize to this young girl and her father, because the father is actually threatening to inflict some violence or physical harm to them should the situation persist. They were just asked to apologize, and nothing was done at all.
Gender-based violence, a worldwide problem and everyday reality. It takes place in the street, on the bus, at home and at school. More than ever, gender-based violence has also infected our virtual spaces online and everywhere in all forms. The impact is crushing. Professor Helen Cahill, University of Melbourne.
So important to focus on gender-based violence prevention in schools for 2 reasons. One, it negatively impacts on participation in learning. The other thing, of course, is it affects people's well-being. So when people are the victims of violence in any form, they're more likely to suffer from mental health distress. But those who are involved in perpetrating violence are also vulnerable. So in the long term, people who engage in forms of violence as young people are much more likely to go on and repeat those patterns of violence in adulthood.
How can we measure the breadth and depth of this violence, especially when children and young people are the target? Manuela Balliet, Together for Girls.
The Violence Against Children and Youth Survey's findings reveal that an overwhelming number of boys and girls are victims of all forms of violence before age 18. And this happens in the child's immediate environment, at home, in school, and in the community. Approximately 3 out of 5 girls and 2 out of 3 boys experience any type of violence in childhood, physical, emotional, and sexual. Girls face particularly high risk of sexual violence.
Often people think of violence as just physical acts, but when we're using this term, we're using it very broadly to include all forms of hurt and harm. So, for example, sexual violence, psychological or emotional violence. And this violence could take place face-to-face, or it could take place on social media. Once we understand that violence can take many forms, we're then ready to switch on our lens around the gendered nature of violence in schools. When we switch on our gender lens, we can see things like typically girls are victimised in certain ways, chiefly by boys, but not only by boys, and that boys are victimised in certain ways, almost always by boys. So we see patterns, and the patterns are gendered.
Gender-based violence is about power and gender relations which are at play everywhere. Baroness Sugg, Special Envoy for Girls' Education, UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office.
The gender lens is incredibly important. We know that gender is a key determiner of violence against both girls and boys. And we know that it affects the drivers and the experience and the impact of violence.
I would like for people who have children and other activists as well, and the general public, to actually put themselves in my shoes. I want them to think about if they had a child and they had to go through the emotional turmoil of being physically or verbally or emotionally violated in the school's premises, how would they actually want to enforce change?
At the root of gender-based violence, we find beliefs, attitudes and norms that perpetuate inequality and powerlessness. Basil Manuel, National Professional Teachers Organisation of South Africa.
Part of the problem being that there are attitudes, practices that are allowed, which in the eyes of the rest of the world is gender-based violence, but it has become almost institutionalized and accepted. It's become normed. If our schools aren't safe, our neighborhoods can never be safe.
This young girl of 8 or 9 years of age, she was stabbed by her jilted lover in broad daylight, and she survived 110 stitches. We took the case to the court of law, and we're still trying the case. The guy is out in bail. He's living his life. He's moved out of the city. And the girl still waits for justice. It's quite frustrating to know that even after years and years of advocacy, campaigning, influencing, lobbying, we do have the laws, but there are massive loopholes in implementation of these laws. And it's really sorry to kind of say this in 2020 that we do have such cases, like everyday cases. Just yesterday there was another case of a Dalit girl who was raped in UP.
Founder and Chief Executive of the Study Hall Foundation, Dr. Urvashi Sahni, talking about the same incident.
We were meeting yesterday, and I was meeting with my whole team, and we were all really feeling helpless, outraged, sickened, heartbroken, and helpless, because we've been working at gender equality through education for such a long time. And we were just wondering, does it make any difference? And we came to the conclusion that yes, it does. And how does it make a difference? One, it's of course a long-term way of working at gender-based violence. Girls actually accept this gender-based violence. It doesn't just happen on streets. It happens at home. They're not safe anywhere. They think it's part of being a girl, and that the best they can do is just save themselves in some way or just be invisible. Once they learn that they have a right to an equal space in the world, whether it's at home, it's out in the street, it's in the workplace, it's in school, anywhere, to an equal, safe space, they begin demanding that. They begin equipping. It gives you a certain sense of confidence to fight back.
So we've got an opportunity when children are at school to set up the kinds of respectful relationships between the genders and within the genders that we really want to have persist into and through adulthood, so that these young people also become parents who are able to raise their own children in ways that teach respect for diversity and difference, and particularly respect across the genders.
Schools can play a significant role in addressing gender-based violence. Education International President Susan Hopgood.
Teachers are the ones that are in the classroom with the students every day. And we can take the lead in interrupting the gender norms that really do underpin gender-based violence. And we can do this through our classroom practices. And very, very importantly, we can do it through the curriculum itself. The most important starting point is finding a way to make teachers understand what gender-based violence is, not just in the abstract, but as an issue that they know because they've lived it themselves or because they've been close to someone who's experienced it. So therefore, a human-centred approach is key to supporting teachers to play an active role.
Schools can also be sanctuaries. They can be safe sanctuaries for girls in several ways. One, the whole culture of a school, which is non-violent. It should be non-violent, it should be caring, it should be safe. Secondly, the school becomes a support system for the girls, which can be extended to the family. So if they're in trouble, teachers can intervene. Our students feel that, they have the teachers' back. The teachers have their back. They have their teachers' support. And then the school accesses services of child protection services, of child welfare services, child helplines, of the police, which girls by themselves probably feel helpless and can't do. They get a voice, and that voice is amplified or supported by the voice of teachers in schools. The schools make it their business to make sure that girls are safe, not just in their schools, but at home as well and in the street as well.
How does gender-based violence pass from one generation to the next? How do boys learn to be violent? Dean Peacock, Promondo.
So schools provide us with an incredible platform to address intergenerational cycles of violence. We know that by far the strongest predictor of a man's use of violence is his exposure to violence as a boy, particularly exposure to domestic violence in the home. And most young people walk around traumatized and confused by the violence that they see at home. They don't have anywhere to discuss it, to understand it, and to make sure that they heal from that violence. Schools are obviously, an ideal platform to provide mental health and psychosocial services to children exposed to violence. And unfortunately, in most countries around the world, there simply are not enough school counselors and school social workers.
Then, of course, there's the education of boys. We need boys to start looking at girls differently, thinking of them differently, and behaving differently, and treating them differently. So when you work with boys on this and you try to deconstruct toxic masculinity, you're also trying to get them to look at femininity differently, to look at women differently, not just as bodies, but as human beings, as persons, deserving equal respect. You need to educate boys out of this toxic masculinity, where one, they learn to think of women's bodies as just bodies, and women just as bodies and objects. And secondly, they grow up with a sense of entitlement to use these bodies the way they will, where consent doesn't figure. And so who is going to educate them out of this mindset? Education gives you a huge opportunity.
The work that I've done in schools with young men to address gender-based violence has inspired me. Young men I've met in schools across the world who are hungry for more meaningful relationships, who are supportive of gender equality, who want to see the girls in their lives do the best that they can.
Switching on a violence prevention lens, where do we start?
So there are lots of approaches that are effective in engaging men and boys in addressing gender-based violence in schools. What we know about those programs is that they are most effective when they're participatory, when they're experiential, when they allow young men and women to reflect on their own socialization, their own process of being socialized into gendered roles, and allow them to think about how well those gender roles work for them and what they'd like to change.
That is the reason why I actually decided to go into the advocacy that I'm doing with SRGBV, school-related gender-based violence. And that is one of the things that I truly focus on and use my story and actually think about the things that I would have liked in that point in time that could actually help myself at that point and all other girls and boys who may be facing the same situations or not worse.
Switching on the gender lens, along with the violence prevention lens and along with the vision for a fair and good world, is a really powerful starting point, but it's not enough. So as well as focusing on what we want to build, we have to have the skills to carry out our vision.
What skills do we need to prevent gender-based violence?
So the skills work in gender-based violence prevention education crosses over with what we call social and emotional learning. And it's where we explicitly grow the personal and social capabilities, such as being able to understand and manage our own and other people's emotional states, such as being able to express our needs and requests in respectful and assertive ways, rather than using aggression or submitting to undue horrible acts on the part of others. We're trying to grow social skills, and the way to grow social skills is to use them. And so children have to socially engage with each other in the learning activities. When they hear each other doing this work, they feel a sense of intimacy and connection to each other, and a very powerful form of recognition takes place. They recognise each other as human, not just as boy or girl, not just as dominant or rejected, not just as smart or not quite so smart in your scholarly work. And this is a very powerful thing to create in a classroom.
Critically important is making sure that you have a whole school approach, that the administrators, the teachers, the coaching staff are all on board and repeat the same messages, provide the same role modeling of gender equitable behavior.
Ending gender-based violence in schools need to involve the whole school community. Lydia, Madyirapanze, FAWE, Zimbabwe.
When we look at a school, we should take it as a community. So the school is not the teachers and the learners themselves, but it includes even the non-teaching staff that are in the school. It includes the people that interact with the school in one way or the other. There is need for that comprehensive approach where we involve everyone who forms the school community. Whole school approaches, if we were to look at them, they are student-centered.
I actually want the students as well to also take the action themselves. If you see something, say something. Do not wait until the last resort, or do not wait until the worst happens to actually say something, because if another person is actually in distress and they do not find it comfortable to report the situation, then you can be of guidance and you can be of help to that person. So those are one of the things that I would actually want people out there and people looking at this right now, watching this, to actually think about and make cognizant decisions in actually wanting to enforce change.
The best way to end gender-based violence is to prevent it from happening in the first place. We all have a role to play.
It is true that the COVID-19 lockdown has both exacerbated violence against girls, adolescents, and women, and shed light on the silent pandemic of gender-based violence. We can make a difference to prevent and reduce violence. We must all take timely actions. All of us, political leaders, policymakers, parents, teachers, community members, children themselves can take action to end violence against children and youth.
Everyone watching this, I would request you, I would plead you that even if you can make one tiny effort of ensuring that a young girl in your house should feel safe, and what steps you can take to make her feel safe in the house, that is it. That is all that is required. If every one of us is responsible and accountable for our actions, that's all that we need to influence change. And all of these changes kind of accumulate and make big policy changes. So all of the changes that we want, or the changes that we really aspire to make a gender just society, or to create safe spaces for everyone, it starts from you and yourself, and you need to make the change.
Welcome and join us. We have an exciting group of people from all around the world, from an interdisciplinary approach, here to discuss and unpack. Before we start introducing everyone that's here today, my name is Fatou Wuri. I'm a gender equality activist and advocate from Sierra Leone. I currently work for UNICEF as an emergency specialist looking at the use of digital technology in the humanitarian space, and I'm based in Geneva. It is an honor to be able to introduce you to our group, our panelists, such an accomplished group of actors, heart space actors is like what I like to say, and people coming from all parts of the world, as you will see, from India to South Africa to the United States, and some of us here based in Europe, and also learning a little bit more about how they're interacting and working daily to eradicate, to end, to combat gender-based violence. So we'll start first with Madeline. Please do introduce yourself. Over.
Thank you, Fatou. Hi everyone. So I'm happy to be here as well. My name is Madeline Kennedy McFoy, and I'm based here in Brussels at the headquarters of Education International. EI is the Global Federation of Teachers, Trade Unions and Organizations, and I work on gender equality issues, including GBV in education. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here, Madeline. Over to you, Ninkozo. Sorry, you're on mute. We can't hear your wonderful voice.
Sorry. Hello, everyone. My name is Nkonzo Mkhize. I'm currently based in South Africa, in Durban. I come from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I'm a student and started a student-based organization informally within the university called the Gender Activist. And what we do is we look to understand and address gender and sexual violence on campus among students and the university community at large. I also work with queer youth in township schools to understand their experiences within their context, as well as young women and women in rural areas in addressing sexual and gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Very excited to hear your perspective. Over to you, Sophie.
Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you. I'm Sophie. I'm based in the United States, in New York, and I'm here representing Chalk Back. So Chalk Back is a youth-led global movement against gender-based harassment and gender-based violence. And what we do is we actually use chalk on the streets to raise awareness and write about people's stories and experiences of gender-based harassment and gender-based violence. So I'm really excited to talk more about youth activism and can't wait for the discussion.
Thank you, Sophie. And Lena?
Thanks, Fatou. My name is Lena. I am the executive director of the Arab Institute for Women. That's at the Lebanese American University. We're based in Beirut, but cover the 22 Arab states. This is an institute that works at the intersection of academia and activism, and it's actually the first of its kind in the Arab region, 47 years old. And that also makes it one of the first in the world. So it's an extraordinary place. I've been doing that for 5 years, and before that, did about 2 decades of work on gender-based violence in humanitarian emergencies around the world.
Thank you, Lena. So good to have you here. Urvashi, all the way from India. I know it's late, so thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thanks, Fatou. So, hi, everybody. I'm Urvashi. I work with an organization called Breakthrough. I've been with them for almost 15 years now. We have, our work based out of India as well as the US. We also we have been using media, arts, and culture really to talk about issues of gender-based violence. And along with that, we merge the two strategies of capacity building, leadership building, so to say, and community outreach, really. Currently, we're working with almost 400,000 adolescents in India with our curriculum called Taro Ki Toli, or Gang of Stars, which has had great results. So I'll be happy to share our learnings from there.
Thank you so much. This is our conversation. We're here to talk to one another, to talk about what we do in our daily lives, in our work, what drives us, what is working, and how we can do better. Nothing was done at all, right? That was repeated twice in the video. So we know that there, in many ways and in many spaces, we continue to fail women and girls, boys and men. But we know that there's a role that each of us can play. We're doing it. We're doing it as actors. We're doing it with our communities. So I want to start with you, Madeline, thinking about Education International, right? The role of teachers in combating and ending gender-based violence. What are some of the approaches you see in your work that you think are really important and opportunities for scale, or at least can give hope in this? Over.
Thanks. So yes, the comment that nothing was done, and I think some of the reason why that happens, that there's a silence, that these are issues that are taboo in a lot of countries and in a lot of contexts, so that even if people are standing there witnessing it, it's very difficult to speak up, it's very difficult to take action. So at EI, we've had a program that ran for 4 years called Education Unions Take Action to End School-Related Gender-Based Violence. And I think the key thing about that program was the fact that it was very human-centered. It really got the participants to think about themselves, not in this disembodied, abstract way as people trying to make change happen, but as embodied beings who know intimately about violence, either through what they've experienced themselves or through what they know. The statistics tell us that in this world, very few people are going to escape some form, very few women and girls in particular are going to escape some form of sexual or gender-based violence. So we are intimately knowledgeable and familiar with this issue. And I think, as the EI president said in the clip earlier, teachers are in the classroom. So I think there are three ways in which they can really work on this topic. Through the content of education, through what's in the curriculum is one really important way, through their own pedagogy, how they go about teaching and what they're teaching in the classroom, and then through their own praxis or their own practice, how they model the behavior, how they go about addressing conflict in the classroom, how they go about finding ways that don't involve corporal punishment. Corporal punishment is another form of violence that takes place in an everyday setting in a school. So for teachers to really have training on how to come with those different approaches and different methodologies, for teachers to be trained so they know how to intervene when they witness violence taking place. And also from a union perspective, the unions have a very important role to play in terms of adopting codes of ethics. You know, it's an ethical issue for a teacher when we're talking about gender-based violence, you know, where they can be perpetrators as well. Let's not shy away from the topic. Everybody in a schooling environment can be both a perpetrator and a victim. So codes of ethics adopted by unions, which union members who are teachers are expected to live up to, is another kind of form of guidance. So I think the role that teachers can play really is quite endless, but it's really important that they receive the training and the support to be able to play that change maker role, if you like.
Thank you for that, Madeline. I think it's really important when you're thinking about power structures, right? And the power and the responsibility and the accountability of teachers, and being able to support them to be responsible in their roles, and the power that they have to impart knowledge, to share knowledge, and to shift those really deep-rooted structural harmful norms that perpetuate gender-based violence. Nkozo, I want to go to you. When our teachers fail us, when structurally the spaces are just not there for that level of interrogation, you are at university and your work is really, you do a lot of activism with young people, with students. What does that look like when where people are supposed to be responsible and accountable, they're not? How do young people come back? How do they rise to that challenge to ensure that our communities and our schools are safe? Over.
That's a big one. Thank you, and I'm gonna try and rise up to that challenge as well. I just loved what Madeline was saying. Because I come from, I'm a trained, educated teacher, so I'm a qualified teacher, as one can say. And as Madeline was mentioning, the three components in terms of content, pedagogy, and practice within the classroom, and what you're looking and what we've been seeing as a group of students in terms of what is happening on campus, that the pervasiveness of gender-based violence and sexual violence in all its different forms continuously goes unnoticed. Well, it's noticed, but it's not attended to within the university itself. And there's been mounds of literature, not extensive per se, but that one that is still available points to how universities themselves don't know how to deal with gender-based violence and sexual violence within universities. So now when you take a teacher education and training campus or college, and you then put in on this gendered lens, and then you look at how pervasive is gender-based violence, basically what we are doing is sending people who are trained as teachers, but who are also perpetrators and victims of sexual violence, which has not been attended to, and going into schools. You know, so we're literally continuing the cycle. So the training of teachers is also key here. It is very, very important. How do young people respond? We come together and we try to address it. We try to make systems work. Do they work? We're still trying to make them work. We are still trying to make them work. And it's taking time. And it was quite amazing for me to, and I'm sure a lot of people have been noticed this, how the entire world came together to address COVID-19. But here we are, have been speaking for people, not just people, for generations upon generations, have been speaking about gender-based violence and sexual violence in schools, in the workplace, everywhere. But the world hasn't come together in that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And just going back to, how students are rising up, the young lady in the video said, when you see something, you say something. We're going to say something, and we are demanding better. I'm going to drive now to Lina. You consider yourself an academic and an activist. So what does that look like when we're trying to break this, when we talk about gender-based violence? How do these two spaces reconcile?
Well, what's important about academia and academic research is that it builds the evidence base. But if you don't break that down and make it meaning for people, for their realities, their lives, and their communities, then what's the point? So, I think I'm an accidental academic in that I come from an activist background. So I believe that unless you are sharing those lessons from the research and the work that we do, there is no way to apply it. So being based in Lebanon, you can't ignore the realities that are happening around you, the lives of young people, and how they're profoundly affected by one crisis after another. So the work that we do is constantly in check. And the way that we're able to galvanize young people in particular, is not through the academic components, the research or education, as much as through the more creative approaches. So things that we do, like art for activism campaigns that inspire activism and ignite people's passions, and also build an army of activists around issues that help us normalize nonviolence. So having these conversations in creative ways, and using the evidence that we have, because we know that it exists. We don't even need any more research to know how pervasive these things are, has been really successful for us. So it's the combination of the two that gives us a platform that resonates, not just with academics and the university and an educational context, but with the people who really need to hear the message, and those are the young people themselves.
No, absolutely. And we can't underestimate the power of evidence-based prevention against violence, right? Gender-based violence. That evidence is what we are able to take to policy, to attract funding, to be able to facilitate some of these structural issues. And so I think it's such a neat combination. And the fact that you're still remembering that at the end of the day, frontline workers, making this evidence accessible so that we can use it for evidence-informed activism, right? And so we're able to speak both the language of the people, but language of the systems to help shape that. That's what it sounds like. That's what your work contributes to. And there are two other speakers that I think will just bring a really interesting dynamic as we're thinking about this from a structural perspective, what teachers do, how we use academia, and how we use evidence. Urvashi, I want to come back to you and breakthrough, right? Breakthrough is sitting in like you said, is a CSO that co-leads the Generation Equality Forum. So now you're thinking of high-level discussions, right? What types of tools, mechanisms, evidence do you use to bring, and your CSO perspective, to bring into these types of forums to really force people to talk about the real issues and to steer governments or multilateral organizations to really think more grassroots?
I think what we try and bring to some of these discussions is the lived experiences of people, of women and girls in the communities where we work. We really work with some of the toughest regions in India. They are the most patriarchal, the most orthodox states. And if you look it up and Google them, you will find that one of the states where we work in Haryana, where we tested our gender-based violence curriculum, a life skill curriculum that we worked out. that has the worst child sex ratio in the country. And girls are really unwanted. And there's a high son preference. So really challenging norms and how do you build a conversation with both boys and girls, and starting really young. Starting in a space where there is so much of a backlash just on the identity of you being a woman or a girl can change the dynamics of your whole persona. What you aspire, what kind of rights you are able to access, what kind of privileges you have, the entitlements you have, that everything just shifts that dynamic. I think that's the perspective that is needed to be able to influence some of these decisions, and those lived experiences of women and girls, along with evidence. I think I completely agree with Lena when she said that. That just brings a new dimension to add to, and you are able to then lay out some very concrete suggestions as to how do you move forward to change this narrative which promotes gender-based violence. Even though it's a pandemic, there is more resources going in for COVID, but really not to address this issue.
So that's super important. Sophie, coming back to what, when we're talking about challenging norms, coming from what Urvashi is saying, you do it in the most explicit way, outside of the classroom walls, but in the community. Can you talk about how young people are leading this very vocal, unapologetic movement, and really forcing all of us to remember that our communities aren't safe enough?
Yes, absolutely. So just a little bit more background about Talkback. So the process of what we do, we have about 100 Instagram accounts around the world, and we ask people to actually submit their stories of harassment, whether it's on the street, whether it's in school, whether it's on public transportation or online even. We ask them to send us anonymously their stories, and then we actually go outside and write those stories, like I mentioned before, on the streets in colorful chalk to raise awareness and show people what's being said. Or for those of us in the Talkback community who can't go out and write on the streets in chalk because of the context, they use graphics to raise awareness online on social media. So I think what's been talked about is so important. How can we engage young people in kind of fun, creative methods of activism that can really, when the structure of the school isn't enough, when there isn't enough in place in the school, to go outside of that and work with activists and young people to challenge what's going on in the school and what's going on in their lives. So what's been really exciting about Talkback is we've seen how young people have come together and created this huge global movement to address a lot of the harassment and gender-based violence that they're facing in school and on the streets without getting permission from the school or without having any sort of organization behind us. We've been able to go out on our own and really do this exciting project that's made a huge impact in a lot of our communities.
Great, thank you. All right, well, listen, it's really been interesting just going around and seeing how, even though you're all coming from different approaches, they're all just needed and they're unique, and they're all coming back to the heart of the matter, trying to shift power dynamics, challenge social norms, harmful social norms, and also ensuring that we support all members of the community to be able to end violence. I'm gonna come back to maybe you, Lena. I'll come to you and we'll go around again. We have this, in the world, we have the slogan, right? Like, educate a girl, educate a community, right? And so let's come back to the heart of education and the role that we can all play. That has been the multilateral slogan of the day. All the ways if we just invest in this young girl, her life will be transformed. But we know that, our schools are unsafe. Gender-based violence happens not only in schools, it happens in homes, it happens in communities. In your work at the university, but also as a humanitarian worker, can you really speak to what we need to be doing doing better more concretely? You've been in this field for a while, so you've seen the persistent challenges, the mistakes we keep making over and over again, but also the real opportunities that we can capitalize on today. So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I mean, I think there are lots of challenges. Even on a good day, I think this is a tall order, you know, making sure that schools are safe, that they're modeling nonviolence, that they have respectful, inclusive, diverse, equitable behaviors in the curriculum, on the playground, you know, everywhere related to that experience. But the challenge is getting everybody else in the community to align with those messages. You know, it's one thing if you've got it in a school context, but that could create a bubble. And if media, religious institutions, family, and community are not on board or are contradicting those messages, you know, you're creating a lot of confusion for this young person who is hearing one thing and then, you know, seeing and doing and learning another. And, you know, you wonder which institutions are really more pervasive and, you know, who wins if it's a battle of different values. The other challenge is all of this is magnified in the context of conflict or insecurity, or now in a global pandemic. You know, every time we face these kinds of challenges, an already difficult situation becomes so much worse. So, you know, for COVID, for instance, you know, we've moved everything online, and we forget that not everybody has access. So, you know, who's included and who is left behind, and what problems have we perhaps solved or avoided by being online, but what have we created? You know, the idea of online violence and all those kinds of things, you know, and social media and a permanent record of things that end up being really detrimental to young women, to girls. So, you know, we have a lot of challenges that, you know, we're not sure how to overcome. I still think there are a lot of opportunities, and I think if messaging is done right in schools, if teachers are on board, if the playground, you know, or any kind of those in-between times, you know, I think are so strategic in the way young people interact with each other. And if there are safe spaces to report, if the school and all of the values, you know, across the board are about inclusion and diversity and equality, you know, we stand a better chance. At least young people start to question those things and maybe take that home and challenge what could be contradictory messages at home and in the community. But, you know, this is a long fight, and we need to spread that message as far and wide as possible.
Absolutely. Nkozo, come back to us. I have a quick question, just coming off what Lina was talking about thinking about diversity, thinking about inclusivity, making sure that everyone, you know, we constantly talk about youth as just monolith, right? You know, it's girls, it's boys, it's this person, it's that community. Right. In your work, I know that you also work with queer communities. When we're talking about violence and violence in its fullness, in its totality, from physical violence, emotional, psychological violence, all the ways in which we make people feel unsafe. With your work working with young people who identify as queer, how is this conversation also being integrated in the broader conversation around gender-based violence?
It's when you then start to maybe look at it in that way, it takes another different dimension. And then the silences that you see within institutions on gender-based violence are even more deafening when it comes to queer youth and queer people in general in our communities. In South Africa, we have a very progressive constitution, but that has not translated into social change. When I say progressive, I mean it protects LGBTQIA+ people within South Africa in terms of discrimination, exclusion, marginalization. It's protected. Queer people are protected from all of those in terms of within legislation, within the South African constitution. But that has not, as said, that has not translated into social behavior, and that has also not translated into our schools. So a queer youth might, in terms of how they are being harassed in school, might be taken within the stereotypical norm of, for instance, a heterosexual, for this purpose of this conversation, a heterosexual male learner harassing a queer male learner. That might be taken as just boys being boys and just roughing about. But when you start to sit down and have conversation, And you start to really get that was just harassment. Those are not just boys being boys. There is issues of power, there's issues of violence taking place. And because of social norms and culture and tradition, that is overlooked, right? And it even goes beyond that in terms of, no, he needs to be toughened up because he's not a boy, you know, whatever a boy means within that social context. So there's a lot of silence, and what has been coming up and continues coming up is how lesbian women and girls are being targeted. You know, some call it corrective rape, but it's rape.
Right.
You know, and that is accepted within communities. Because how dare you love another woman if you're a woman? So yeah, and our institutions in terms of police services are not really educated. I don't know how to put it, you know. Forthcoming in terms of attending to such cases. And then you start to see that this not just only happens when one is older in life, but it starts young and it doesn't get better.
Yeah.
You know, working with some queer youth, them sharing that being targeted by community members that they will rape you doesn't just start when you're 21 and when you are 30 or when you're 40, but it starts really young when they see you, the way that your gender identity, your gender expression, and how you perform it. Mm-hmm. and that warrants correction because you are coming in with a different script. Yeah. That is against, you know, social culture and community beliefs.
Yeah. Thank you for
Can
that.
I jump in then?
Yeah, please. Everyone open your mics. Let's just have a conversation.
Yeah, I was just thinking that so then the work that you do in Konzo and also Sophie is youth-led, and that's going to go so far and take the community so far. But if everybody in the community doesn't become involved, and it really has to start at the so-called grassroots. I hate that terminology, but it has to start inside of communities with the people who are part of the community. They have to start speaking with each other, listening to each other and finding their own solutions. I think that yes, policies can be in place, institutions, organizations, unions, everybody can try to do something, but unless the people in the community themselves start to find their own solutions, it won't be sustained, it won't be understood, and it will be viewed very much as something that's coming from the outside. So on the issue of LGBTQ people in education on the African continent, some of our member organizations at EI have very, very tentatively started to try to have those conversations. But if you're a teacher in a classroom and you have one viewpoint that you want to introduce, but all of the children sitting in front of you come from homes with viewpoints that contradict what you want to introduce in the classroom, you're blocked. You can't take a step forward. Do you see what I'm saying? So it really demands that the silence is chipped. We can't just break it. Actually, it's a long process. We're chipping at it, you know, take your small hammer and your small chisel and you're chipping away at it little by little, little by little, little by little.
I love that.
Can I jump in?
Yes, I have a question before you jump in as well. How do we do what Madeline was saying? Not chipping. As an African, I'm like, hey, we have to break. But yeah, and how do we do it safely?
Can I respond? Can I just quickly respond? I'm sorry, but can I respond?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Urvashi. So I've been privileged enough to work within a center called the Center for Visual Methodologies for Social Change, and it is within participatory visual methods and working within communities that, as you say, Madeline, change can start to happen. Starting with communities from the beginning, from the very beginning. and not just later when there's recommendations and when there's policies coming through, you know. That's what I've learned. Social change occurs.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the problem as the community understands it.
Right. And
Yeah,
Urvashi,
I think.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, Urvashi, really quickly, and then Lena, I would love to hear what you have to say.
Okay. So when it comes to communication, what we have seen, at least in India, is that nobody talks to each other. Children don't talk to parents. Children don't talk to teachers. Boys don't talk to girls. So how? So these initial even conversations need to be facilitated. And what for us has worked is having these facilitated intergenerational, intergender dialogues. We used very hi-fi jargons and terms, but for the project purposes, but that's how, if you don't facilitate, they are not talking to each other. And what we also recently found out during the COVID process, some research we did, we figured out that there is also no family time, so to say. Right. So they don't come together as a family. They're, even for meal times, separate groups have separate dinner times. Yeah, so there is no one meal that the whole family kind of sits together and has. So there are very few spaces where people actually come together to speak. And I feel that's really important to even start a process of having a reflection or being able to listen to the other's point of view, that you need to talk. And how does that happen is something that all of us have to work out in our own spaces in different ways.
Absolutely. Lena?
I wanted to add, in terms of chipping away at this and making sure everybody's on the same message, that we can't underestimate the role of the galvanizers and the agitators and the insiders who are already doing the work. You know, some of us who kind of go from country to country, we need to find those people. It's our responsibility, actually, to work with those people, to bolster, to support, to give the tools and resources for them to help spread those messages that they've already been spreading. Because there are these perceptions that things like equality, like feminism, whatever, are imported and imposed concepts, and they're not. And everywhere that I've been, and everywhere that you all have been, and everywhere in the world, those movements already exist on the inside. So, you know, if you're looking for allies and looking for the people who are the change makers, they're already there. And if we want to make sure that families, that communities, that the media, the role models, religious institutions, anybody else that might contradict whatever messages we create in the bubble that is school, you know, we need to make sure that we're using those people on the inside. That's an army, and they are powerful, and they're already doing the work.
You got lots of claps as you said that. Sophie, I'm really curious. I mean, the utilization of social media, this public spaces you occupy, the diverse group of young people you work with. How do you do this safely? What is interaction? I mean, what are your reflections based on what we're saying here? How do we foster communication? How do we already tap into support, just implore, celebrate people who are already activists and doing the work on the ground?
Yes, absolutely. That's something I wanted to say. Young people are already engaging in this work, and young people are so hungry to be engaging in this work and so passionate and so motivated. And I've seen that with my community with Chalk Back, just the excitement and the passion and the joy really that comes from being in this global community. You know, we have activists literally all around the world. You can find them, I should mention to those of you watching, if you do search Instagram, cat calls of, and then your city. That's how you find us on Instagram. But I think probably when it comes to chipping away at things and talking about denormalizing gender-based harassment and gender-based violence, some of the best moments that we've had within Chalk Back is when people message us on Instagram and tell us their story, and they'll maybe say something like, I'm not sure if this really counts as harassment. Maybe this is just a normal part of being a girl. This is just part of my experience. And then we're able to say, no, you're right. That was uncomfortable. That was unacceptable. So I think some of the most exciting activist work that we're doing within Chalk Back is validating people's experiences and telling them, no, your gut feeling is right. That was not okay. That is gender-based violence. That is gender-based harassment. So I would say, just going off of what everyone is saying, chipping away can start from those one-on-one conversations on social media. We also have public events where we talk to people about what they're facing. So it really does come from conversation and dialogue, raising awareness and having people share their stories firsthand.
We've got we've got a couple more minutes, but I want to just turn it to everyone. Your mics are on, so please just feel free to jump in. This is a community. The theme, the recurring theme is this chipping away / this breaking, right? What is your vision for that? We've been doing it for a long time. We're standing on the shoulders of many people. We're standing on the shoulders of people who've been doing it in the past, who are doing it right now with no recognition, limited resources, putting their lives at risk, and we continue to do it regardless. So in celebrating all of that, the gains that we've made, the challenges we continue to have, the need to just knock down some doors and some walls that just need to be gone already. What is your vision for chipping away to everyone who is watching today? So anyone can start.
Well, I can go first. I was going to say that much as we do, this is work, it's more than work. It's also what we do in our own lives and what we model in our own lives. And for people raising children, it's also what you're transmitting to those children for whom you have responsibility, is one thing. The second thing is, I hear you, Fatou. Yes, in some contexts, we want that wall to come down. We want the silences. We're sick and tired of the silence. We want it all to, but the resistance is massive. And in all the work that we are doing and has been done, we're also pushing against the backlash. So we have to remain focused. And that's why I think the chipping helps us to focus and remain on target, that we're continuing and we will keep going for as long as it takes.
Great.
So for me, it's the personal is political, and that's where I come from. It's a journey, it's a process, right? It can't happen overnight. Only laws will not change the scenario. It will happen ultimately. 2030 is current goal. Hoping, really hoping hard that we reach there by 2030 and we are able to see the shift. I think young people have the key. If there is this momentum where young people are coming together, I think we need to just invest in them, have more co-creation, help them articulate that vision into something that will change these dynamics.
Thank you. Sophie, your mic is on mute. Are you gonna go?
Sure. Just jumping off of that, I do think that young people have the energy and excitement. Then going off of that, I think intergenerational dialogue and knowledge sharing is so key to moving forward as a collective. I think also ensuring that everyone knows that even if they take the smallest action, even if it's one conversation with a family member who disagrees with you, or one post on social media, or one poster or drawing that you're creating, everyone can do what they're able to and use their skills to contribute to this larger conversation. I think that's a really important part of chipping away at this huge problem that is gender inequality.
I would like everything that everyone was saying. Sorry. I'm just like for everything that everyone was saying, and also not to stop these conversations. I think that's also one key element, is not to stop, to, as Madeline was saying, to keep on focusing on that, and not to stop talking about it, and not to stop doing something about it. The talking and the doing has to go hand in hand. I think, yeah, that's my contribution.
Thank you. Melina.
Well, I would say that my panel friends are such powerhouses. So I agree with everything you've said. I love the idea of doing what you can from where you are, start where you stand, and there's something that you can do anywhere in any space. But also, and most important, is the young leaders and the galvanizers who, as I see, are getting more articulate, stronger, less compromising in their demands, more clear. They are bigger, better, faster than we are, and I'm so happy for it. And they are not the leaders of tomorrow; they're actually leaders in their own right now. So we just need to step aside and let them do the work that that we haven't finished yet.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, our panelists, really friends here having a conversation. Thank you for watching. If you see something, say something, be safe while doing it, keep chipping away. Thank you for chipping away. And thank you for have always been chipping away. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and stay safe. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.